Hey folks, welcome back to Legacy of Old Age. Ever wonder if being fat or thin makes a difference when it comes to living a long, full life? It's a question that's been buzzing around like a bee in a bonnet, especially for us old-timers who've seen a few more sunsets than most. Some say a little extra padding keeps you warm through the winters of life, while others swear being thin as a rail is the ticket to a ripe old age. So, who lives longer, the fat or the thin? Today, we're digging into that very question, and I've got stories that'll make you laugh, think, and maybe even change the way you look at that extra slice of pie. Stick with me, because we're finding the answer and a few tricks from the old days with a modern twist to keep us kicking for years to come. In the miles ahead, you'll hear about a weary widow who outlived all her doctor's predictions, a hefty farmer who danced at his 100th birthday, a frail gal whose story broke my heart, and a straight talk from my own pop that turned everything I thought I knew upside down. So grab a cup of coffee or whatever you sipped back when the scales didn't matter and settle in, folks. This road's got some curves worth taking. It all started a few years back when I paid a visit to Mrs. Clara up in Kentucky. She lived in a little cabin tucked in the holler, the kind of place where the air smells of pine and the creek sings you to sleep at night. Clara was 89, thin as a fence post, with a smile that'd light up the darkest day. She'd been a seamstress her whole life, stitching dresses for half the county, and she'd raised 6 kids on her own after her husband passed in '62. I'd known her since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. She'd made my first Sunday suit, a little blue number I wore till the seams gave out. I stopped by with a basket of apples from my orchard, figuring she'd whip up one of her famous pies. But when I got there, I found her sitting on her porch, rocking in a chair older than me, her bony hands folded in her lap. "Clara," I said, setting the basket down, "you're looking spry as ever. What's your secret?" She chuckled, a sound like wind chimes on a breezy day, and patted the seat next to her. "Folks always thought I wouldn't last long, being so thin," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Doctors told me I'd keel over by 60. Said I didn't have enough meat on my bones to fight off the colds. But here I am, outliving 'em all." I sat there, folks, the smell of apples mixing with the pine in the air, and listened as Clara told me her story. She'd always been skinny, born thin as a whisper, she said, and folks in town used to whisper she'd never make it through the hard winters. But Clara had a fire in her that no scale could measure. She walked a mile every morning to fetch water from the creek, even in her 80s, and she ate what her garden gave her: greens, beans, a little cornbread, nothing fancy. "I never worried about being thin," she told me, her eyes twinkling. "I just kept moving, kept laughing, kept loving my kids. That's what keeps a body going, not the pounds." Ever known someone who defied the odds, folks? Maybe a thin gal who outlived everyone, or a hefty fella who kept on trucking? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. Clara's words got me thinking about what really keeps us old-timers going. Is it the number on the scale, or something deeper? I started digging, and what I found was a mix of old wisdom and new science. Turns out, a little walking, like Clara's daily trek, can do wonders, no matter your size. Back in the day, we'd say you gotta keep the blood moving to keep the heart happy. And now the docs say 30 minutes a day can add years to your life. Clara's story was just the beginning, and it set me on a path to find out more about who really lives longer, the fat or the thin. Clara's story planted a seed in my mind. Folks, her weary frame and fiery spirit made me wonder if being thin really was the key to a long life, or if there was more to it than what the scale said. I'd always figured a little extra weight might drag you down, but then I met Mr. Earl down in Arkansas, and he turned that notion on its head faster than a twister in a trailer park. Earl was a big man, the kind of fella who'd make a rocking chair groan, but he showed me that being fat didn't mean you couldn't live long and live well. Earl lived on a sprawling farm just outside Little Rock, the kind of place where the fields go on forever and the sunsets paint the sky like a canvas. He was 99 when I met him, round as a barrel, with a laugh that'd shake the rafters and a twinkle in his eye that said he'd seen it all. Earl had been a farmer since he could walk, raised cattle, grew soybeans, and had a soft spot for apple pie that had put a smile on his face a mile wide. I'd heard about him through a cousin who swore Earl was the oldest man in the county, and when I got an invite to his 100th birthday party, I knew I had to see this for myself. I pulled up to Earl's farm on a warm September evening, the air thick with the smell of hay and barbecue. The party was in full swing, a big tent in the yard, a fiddler playing tunes that'd make your feet tap, and a crowd of folks from all over the county, laughing and raising their glasses to the man of the hour. Earl was in the middle of it all, wearing a red flannel shirt that stretched tight over his belly, a straw hat tipped back on his head, and a grin that'd melt butter. He was dancing, yes, dancing with his great-granddaughter, a little gal in pigtails who couldn't stop giggling as he twirled her around. I stood there, folks, my jaw on the ground, watching this 100-year-old man move like he was 50, his laughter booming over the music. After the dance, Earl plopped down in a chair next to me, wiping sweat off his brow with a handkerchief. "You're the fella asking about living long, ain't ya?" he said, his voice deep as a well. I nodded, still half stunned, and he chuckled. "Folks always told me I'd keel over early too fat," they said. "But I've been fat since I was a boy, and I'm still here, ain't I?" I couldn't argue with that, so I asked him his secret. Earl leaned back, his chair creaking under him, and said, "I eat what I love, pie, biscuits, gravy, the works, but I work hard too. Out in the fields every day till I was 90, hauling hay, chasing cows. And I laugh till my sides hurt. That's what keeps a man going, not some number on a scale." I sat there, the taste of barbecue lingering on my tongue, and let that sink in. Earl was fat, no two ways about it, but he was healthy, strong, and happier than most folks half his age. It got me thinking maybe it's not about being fat or thin, but about how you live with the weight you've got. I started digging a little deeper, and what I found backed up Earl's way of living. The docs call it metabolically healthy obesity, a fancy way of saying you can be fat and still fit, as long as your blood pressure, cholesterol, and sugar are in check. Earl might have been big, but he was active, ate his greens with his pie, and kept his spirits high, and that's what kept him going. Ever known a big fella who outlived the skeptics, folks? Or maybe someone who proved the doctors wrong with a hearty laugh and a hard day's work? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. Earl's way of living taught me a trick from the old days with a modern spin. Back when I was a kid, we'd say a hard day's work keeps the doctor away. And now, the science says staying active, even if it's just a walk around the farm, can keep your heart ticking longer, no matter your size. The docs say 30 minutes a day of moving, whether it's hauling hay like Earl or just strolling to the mailbox, can lower your risk of heart trouble, even if you've got a few extra pounds. Earl's dance wasn't the last lesson I'd learn on this road, and it got me wondering what the other side of the scale had to say about living long. Earl's 100th birthday party left me grinning ear to ear, Folks, that big man dancing with his great-granddaughter showed me that a little extra weight didn't have to mean a shorter life, not if you lived it right. But as I drove away from his farm, the fiddler's tune still echoing in my head, I couldn't help but wonder about the other side of the coin. If being fat could still mean a long, full life, what about being thin? Clara had outlived her doctors with her weary frame, but I knew it wasn't always that way, and that's when I remembered Miss Nellie, a frail gal from my childhood, whose story taught me a lesson I'd never forget. Miss Nellie lived down the road from us when I was growing up in Missouri, in a little shotgun house with a tin roof and a front yard full of wildflowers she'd planted herself. She was 71 back then, thin as a whisper, with hands that shook when she poured her tea and a voice so soft you had to lean in to hear her. Nellie had been a school teacher once, same as Clara, but where Clara had a fire in her, Nellie seemed like a candle flickering in the wind. She'd never married, never had kids, and she lived on her own with just a tabby cat named Patches for company. I'd stop by sometimes with my mama, bringing her a jar of preserves or a loaf of bread, and Nellie would always smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and offer us a cup of chamomile tea from her garden. But even as a kid, I could tell Nellie wasn't well. She was so thin, you could see the bones in her wrists, and she'd get winded just walking to the mailbox. Mama used to say, "Nellie don't eat enough to keep a bird alive, always giving her food away to the neighbors." It was true. Nellie lived on next to nothing, a little bread, a little tea, maybe some greens if she felt like it. She'd say, "I don't need much, never did," but you could see the toll it took. She'd been thin her whole life, but in her later years, it wasn't just thinness, it was frailty, the kind that made her bones brittle and her steps unsteady. Mama tried to get her to eat more, bringing over stews and cornbread, but Nellie would just smile and say, "I'll have a bite, but you take the rest for the young ones." One winter, when I was about 12, Nellie caught a cold that turned into pneumonia, and she didn't have the strength to fight it. I remember the day Mama got the call. She set the phone down, her face pale as a sheet, and said, "Nellie's gone." She passed that February, quiet as a whisper, leaving behind a garden full of wildflowers and a cat that meowed at her door for weeks. I stood at her funeral, folks, the ground still hard with frost, and listened as the preacher talked about her kind heart. But all I could think was how Nellie's thinness, that frail, fragile frame, hadn't given her the reserves she needed to make it through. It broke my heart, seeing her go so soon, when she had so much love left to give. I sat on our porch that night, the air cold enough to see my breath, and thought about what Mama had said, that Nellie didn't eat enough to keep a bird alive. It got me wondering if being too thin could be just as hard on a body as being too heavy, and when I started digging, I found the science backed it up. The docs say being underweight in old age, like Nellie was, can be a real danger. It means you don't have the reserves to fight off illness, and it can make your bones brittle, your muscles weak, and your immune system shaky. They call it sarcopenia, a fancy word for losing muscle as you age, and it hits thin folks harder if they're not eating enough to keep strong. Ever known someone who seemed too thin to keep going, folks? Or maybe you've worried about a loved one not eating enough. Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. Nellie's passing taught me a trick from the old days with a modern spin. Back when I was a kid, we'd say you gotta eat hearty to weather the storm, and now the docs say seniors need enough calories and protein to keep their strength up. Things like eggs, beans, or a good stew can make all the difference. They say aim for a little protein at every meal, a boiled egg for breakfast, a handful of nuts for a snack, or a bowl of bean soup for supper to keep your muscles from wasting away. Nellie's story got me thinking about the balance we need to live long, and it wasn't long before I got a straight answer from someone closer to home. Nellie's story lingered in my mind like the scent of her chamomile tea. Folks, a quiet reminder that being too thin could be just as hard on a body as anything else. It got me thinking about the balance we need to keep going, and I figured I'd seen both sides of the scale: Clara's weary strength, Earl's hardy longevity, and Nellie's fragile end. But I still didn't have a straight answer to the question, fat or thin, who lives longer? I'd heard stories that pulled me one way, then the other, and I needed something solid to tie it all together. That's when I turned to my own pop, a man who'd always been on the heavier side, and a talk with his doctor that finally gave me the clarity I'd been chasing. Pop lived in that same little house outside Springfield, Missouri, where the blackberry bushes still grew wild and the porch creaked under every step. He was 83, round as a barrel, with a belly that had earned him the nickname Big Hank down at the diner. Pop had always been a big eater: biscuits and gravy for breakfast, a slab of ham for lunch, and a slice of pie to finish the day, but he'd been worrying lately. Ever since he'd overheard some folks at the barber shop talking about how being fat could cut your years short. I found him one evening on the porch, rocking in his chair with a mug of coffee in hand, the air smelling of wood smoke and the last of the summer flowers. "I don't want to go early," he told me, his brow furrowed deeper than a plowed field. "I've been fat my whole life. Am I in trouble?" I didn't have an answer for him. Folks, not yet, but I promised I'd find out. Pop had a checkup coming up with Doc Evans, our family sawbones in Tulsa, and I tagged along, figuring I'd get the straight dope from someone who'd seen it all. Doc's office was a cozy little place, with a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and old magazines, and a desk piled high with papers. Doc himself was a weary fella, 65, with a mustache that'd make a walrus jealous, and a laugh that'd put you at ease. He'd been looking after Pop for years, and when we sat down in his exam room, I got right to the point. "Doc," I said, "Pop's worried about his weight, says he's too fat to live long. What's the truth here? Fat or thin, who lives longer?" Doc leaned back in his chair, stroking that mustache, and gave me a look that said he'd heard this question 1,000 times. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice steady as a preacher's. "I've seen thin folks keel over early and fat folks dance at their 100th birthday and the other way around. It's not just about the scale. It's about what's going on inside." He pulled out Pop's chart, pointing to numbers I couldn't make heads or tails of, and broke it down. "Pop's got a little extra weight. His BMI's higher than the books like, but his blood pressure's good, his cholesterol's in check, and his heart's ticking like a clock. He's active, eats his greens with his pie, and laughs more than most. That's what matters." I sat there, folks, the hum of the air conditioner filling the quiet, and let that sink in. Doc went on, saying the science shows it's not just about being fat or thin, it's about your health under the hood. A little extra weight can actually be a buffer in old age, giving you reserves to fight off illness, something the docs call the obesity paradox. They've found that seniors with a bit of extra padding, like Pop, sometimes do better after things like surgery or infections, because they've got more to draw on. But too much weight can strain your heart, raise your blood pressure, and up your risk for diabetes, so it's a fine line. On the flip side, being thin can mean less stress on your joints, but if you're underweight, like Nellie was, you might not have the strength to bounce back from a cold. "Balance is the key," Doc said, tapping his pen on the desk. "Eat enough to keep strong, move enough to keep loose, and get your checkups to catch trouble early." Pop let out a big sigh, his shoulders relaxing for the first time all day, and grinned at me. "Guess I'll keep my pie," he said, "but I'll walk to the diner from now on." I couldn't help but laugh. Folks, that was Pop, always finding a way to have his cake and eat it too. But Doc's words stuck with me, and I started digging deeper into what the science says. Turns out, the healthiest spot for most seniors isn't too fat or too thin, it's somewhere in the middle. A BMI between 23 and 28, where you've got enough reserves, but not so much you're straining your body. And more than that, it's about the numbers that don't show on the scale: your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your sugar, and the habits that keep them in check. Ever worried about your weight, folks? Or maybe you've got a trick for keeping your health in check, fat or thin? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. That day with Doc taught me a trick from the old days with a modern spin. Back when I was a kid, we'd say you gotta eat to live, not live to eat. And now the docs say to aim for a balanced diet: a little protein, a little greens, a little pie, and get your numbers checked at least once a year. Pop left that office with a spring in his step, and his relief got me thinking about how we can all find that balance to keep going strong, no matter what the scale says. Doc's straight talk in that exam room was like a light in the fog. Folks, it cut through all the noise and gave me a clear view of what really matters when it comes to living long. I'd seen Clara outlive her doctors with her weary frame, watched Earl dance at 100 with his barrel belly, mourned Nellie's early passing from being too frail, and sat with Pop as he wrestled with his own worries about being fat. Each story added a piece to the puzzle, and by the time I walked out of Doc's office, the sun dipping low over Tulsa, I knew the answer to the question: fat or thin, who lives longer? It's not about the scale, it's about the balance you strike with the life you've got. Let's roll it back and look at the road we've traveled, folks. There's Clara, thin as a fence post, rocking on her Kentucky porch at 89, outliving every prediction because she kept moving, kept laughing, kept loving. I can still see her there, the creek singing in the background, her bony hands folded in her lap, telling me it's the fire inside that keeps a body going, not the pounds. Then Earl, round as a barrel, dancing at his 100th birthday in Arkansas, proving that a little extra weight didn't stop him from living long and living well, all thanks to hard work and a hearty laugh. I'll never forget the sound of that fiddler's tune, or the way Earl's great-granddaughter giggled as he twirled her around, 100 years young. Miss Nellie, frail as a whisper, leaving us too soon in Missouri because she didn't have the strength to fight off a cold, a quiet reminder that being too thin can be a heavy burden. I can still feel the frost under my boots at her funeral, the ache in my chest as I thought of her wildflowers blooming without her. And Pop, my own big Hank, sitting on his Springfield porch with a coffee in hand, learning from Doc that his extra pounds weren't a death sentence, not if he kept his health in check and his spirits high. I can still hear his laugh as he said, "Guess I'll keep my pie," a weight lifting off his shoulders. They're all different, ain't they? Clara's a weary widow with a garden full of greens. Earl's a hefty farmer with a soft spot for pie. Nellie's a fragile soul with a heart too big for her body. And Pop's a stubborn old cuss who'd rather eat gravy than worry about his waistline. But they've all taught me one thing: it's not about being fat or thin. It's about finding the balance that keeps your body strong and your heart happy. I got to thinking, if they can do it, so can we. And I'll be darned if I don't share what I've learned to help every old-timer out there keep on kicking. So let's round up some tricks from the old days with a modern twist to keep us going strong, fat or thin. First off, eat to live, not live to eat. Back when I was a kid, we'd say a good meal keeps the doctor away, and now the docs say seniors need a balanced plate to stay strong. A little protein eggs, beans, a good piece of chicken keeps your muscles from wasting away, like Nellie needed. A little green spinach, collards, whatever grows in your garden keeps your heart ticking, like Clara showed us. And a little pie because life's too short to skip the good stuff keeps your soul happy, like Earl and Pop would tell you. Aim for enough to keep you strong, but not so much you're straining your joints. The docs say BMI between 23 and 28 is a sweet spot for most of us, giving you reserves without the risk. Second, keep moving, even if it's just a little. Clara walked her mile every day, Earl hauled hay till he was 90, and Pop started strolling to the diner after Doc's advice. Back in the day, we'd say a hard day's work keeps you young, and now the science says 30 minutes a day a walk around the block. A dance in the kitchen can add years to your life. It don't matter if you're fat or thin. What matters is keeping the blood moving and the heart pumping. The docs say even light stuff like gardening or sweeping the porch can lower your risk of heart trouble and keep your joints loose, so you're ready for whatever comes your way. And here's the best trick of all. Folks, get your checkups and don't skip them. Pop's numbers told Doc more than any scale ever could, and Nellie might have had a fighting chance if she'd known how frail she really was. Back when I was young, we'd go to the doc when the cows came home, but now I say go once a year, get your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your sugar checked. It's like checking the oil in your tractor. You gotta know what's under the hood to keep it running smooth. And if you're worried about your weight, fat or thin, ask your doc about it. They can tell you if you're in the clear or if you need to tweak a thing or two. What's your trick for staying strong, folks? Ever found a balance that keeps you going, fat or thin? Drop it in the comments. Your stories are the gold here, and they might just help someone else find their way. Hit that like button if these tales hit home. Smash subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. There's more wisdom waiting just around the bend. Share this with a friend who'd get a kick out of it. Let's keep the conversation going and keep our hearts ticking. I've got more stories to share, so stick with me. We're not done yet.